We continue in this last video talking about what the different exchange regimes are. In this presentation that is available to you, I ask you to watch this video. It is about what Bretton Woods is, where I told you that the United States established what their backup coin was, gold. And later, from that date until practically 1971, where I mentioned in the previous video the president in turn, which was Richard Nixon, ends with what the pattern is. The currency was no longer going to be backed with gold. Here is the video. I ask you to please watch it. President Nixon practically says that the speculators were the ones who won the game. The US was no longer willing to go into these problems of supporting its currency with gold. From then on, it is a fiat currency that is backed up with credibility. We believe that the world believes that the currency has value, and because we believe it, it has. The day we don't believe that the currency has value, we're going to be in serious problems. And well, here in the presentation, they are practically analyzing what the periods have been through time, where the currency is analyzed. Here the exchange rate was floating based on the supply and demand, in this case, the dollar, and so on. Where we are also going to see the other categories that I mentioned in video 1, where what are the hard pegs, the soft pegs, and the definitions of what these categories are, where certain methodologies are adopted, where there can be a slight shift, a change in the list. And this would fall, for example, in these categories and other criteria. The strongest currency would be where a country can grant all its sovereignty and replace what is the local currency. That is why there are countries that are using the dollar as their local currency, for example, Panama, for example, Ecuador. And I ask you why you think that these countries decided not to have a local currency? Well, if they decided not to have a local currency, it's because practically when they had a local currency, they printed so much of that currency they had no control and ended up causing very strong inflation for the country, in such a way that the currency emission that ended up affecting the country was very uncontrolled and the cost was greater than the benefit. And there were no laws or non-believable laws that were not going to be printed anymore, and some countries, to give credibility, say, you know what, I'm not going to have that little machine to make money anymore, I'm not going to have a local currency, and I'm practically going to join the dollar. But here what I would like you to remember is, why do countries do that? That's a very strong decision, because if you know how to use the currency, the printing machine, what the central bank is, it's the golden egg chicken. Because you're using the machine to make money and you're creating a lot of value for the economy if you know how to use it. Because with those bills that cost almost zero to produce, they begin to distribute among the population. And if it is used in a measured way, you can help economic growth, right? However, it is difficult to use them in a measured way. There is always the incentive to continue printing a little more money. And by printing, the currency begins to lose value. And more incentives to continue printing, and the currency depreciates more and falls into an inflationary spiral where inflation explodes. It ends up damaging the population a lot. And once the population is damaged a lot, it is very difficult to reverse it, because inflation is very harmful. It's very, very harmful. In practically weeks or half a year, inflation can come out of control. And if it comes out of control, it will damage the population a lot. Poor people are going to be poorer, the rich are almost not going to be affected, and there are going to be very strong social gaps between rich and poor. And a country that has very strong social gaps, where practically disappears the middle class, is a country that will have many social problems, and to reverse that it takes generations, it is not so easy. You must be very careful with inflation, because a high inflation tends to make the poor poorer, and for the rich, it almost does not affect them. Social gaps are created very strong, and these are problems that arise in the economy, and it is very difficult to get rid of them. That is why inflation must always be monitored closely and know how to use the printing machine. As I was saying, several countries have decided not to have a local currency, and they are dollarizing. They dollarize, and once this is done, you can reduce inflation and gives credibility to your currency. But the price to pay is the unavailability to print money. In this graph, there's a distribution of the world's percentages and how they were used, if the changes were fixed, the hard peg, a soft peg, more flexible type of change, and I would like you to analyze a little bit of this. We could be analyzing which is the best type of change for a country, and there won't be a single answer. I can tell you that a fixed type of change, it's good, and it's only adopted temporarily. And a fixed exchange type is adopted when you have very strong inflationary problems. With a fixed exchange type, you can lower inflation, not to zero, and it is not the goal to lower it to zero, but to lower it to 10%, 8%, 15%, and it is more or less manageable. However, when the fixed exchange rate is no longer possible, it is when the dollarization should be considered. So if you ask me, in Mexico or in Latin America, should the dollarization be considered? I would say no. A dollarization should be considered when there are very strong inflationary problems. Currently in Latin America, there are no very strong inflationary problems. Okay, that's an extreme measure, the dollarization. I would like you to reflect on this, analyze it in detail, and comment on it a little more in class. You should also investigate this. It would be very good, and you will be able to realize the interest in learning all these topics related to the exchange rate. Well, with that, I end the video. I hope you found this videos interesting and that they helped you understand the balance of payments. See you in future videos.